Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Brian Johnson. I'm the president of MassMEDIC, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today to another one of our exclusive briefings. Today we're doing this with our great partners at TriNet, and you'll get a chance to hear about effectively scaling a life sciences company. We have some great guests here who are going to take us through a live case study, and we'll be moderating a discussion with myself and Jacob Stebbins from TriNet. Before I hand it over to Jake, I am going to just give you a couple of key tips. We have a chatbot here that you can submit questions to, and feel free to add those at any time during the program. We have a good list of questions, but things are going to come up, and we encourage a lot of interaction. So please feel free to fire in those questions, and we'll make sure to read them as we go along. We're also recording this session, so we'll be able to have a playback for those of you who may have missed something and want to catch something. But without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Jake to introduce our great speakers and start this robust discussion.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, so as Brian mentioned, we have two really fantastic resources today that we're very lucky to be able to join us. The first is Steve Favaloro. Steve is the Chief Financial Officer of Arranta Bio. You may know his previous company where he was also Chief Financial Officer, Brammer Bio. He has the responsibility for the company's finance, HR, procurement, and IT functions. He was responsible at Brammer for overseeing the financial health and information systems during a period of rapid growth and the execution of a $200 million capacity expansion program, resulting in the ultimate sale to Thermo Fisher for $1.7 billion in May of 2019. Prior to his work at Brammer, Steve's held various FP&A roles at Bruker Corporation, including an assignment supporting multiple manufacturing operations in Germany and Switzerland. He began his career at Millipore Corporation, and he is a Boston College alumnus, which is fantastic. So hi, Steve.
Hey, guys. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. And our second guest is Saul Howerton. So Saul works for an organization called Vistra, and Saul leads the Vistra's global HR and mobility advisory and U.S. tax services. So he's responsible for the oversight and delivery of all advisory services to Vistra's U.S.-based clients. Saul's expertise spans a broad range of technical areas from HR and global mobility to internal tax and legal-related areas, such as corporate governance and entity establishment. Saul specializes in helping high-growth companies overcome challenges related to international expansion and operations. And prior to joining Vistra over 12 years ago, Saul was senior P&L at Intel Corporation. And Saul is an MBA in finance, international business from Santa Clara University, and a BA from marketing at University of Wisconsin, Eau Claire. Hi, Saul.
Hi, Jacob. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So the way that this is going to work is Brian and I are just going to moderate. The idea here being we're going to keep it pretty conversational. And I'm going to let Brian start with the questions. And if anybody has, follow-ups or would like to go further into depth on something that we're already asking, as Brian pointed out, please use the chat bot. And hopefully, we'll have some time at the end too to get through those and help everybody out.
Great, thanks, Jake. Steve, let's start with you. When we talked the other day, you talked about some very significant sort of scale ups in terms of growing your organization very quickly. Maybe you could kind of take us through a little bit of what you're doing now at Arranta Bio in terms of the scale up, and tell us really where, what are some of the major challenges you faced while doing it, and maybe a couple of observations on some of the things that maybe you thought were challenging, but actually turned out to be a little less so.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. I'll talk a little bit about Brammer and experience at Brammer, and then what I'm doing now at Arranta. So Brammer Bio, I joined in 2016. We had an organization of about 80 people and a site in Gainesville, Florida, but we had ambitions to grow our commercial, late stage and commercial manufacturing capability in Massachusetts. And over a 3-year period, we grew that organization from that 80 to over 650 leading up to the sale to Thermo in May of 2019. So rapid deployment of capital and building of that team. Fall of last year, the former CEO of Brammer, so the next adventure was in the microbiome space and microbiome medicine, which is a sort of up and coming and novel therapeutic modality, similar to the way cell and gene therapy was when we entered Brammer. And so, I mean, what we're doing now is we fall of last year, we had about 15 employees. I was employee 2, and fast forward to today, we're about 95 employees and scaling fast. So it really in the CDMO space, which is the space I've spent the better part of the last decade, is focused on building capacity and capability to be able to serve our customers in the market who are traditionally product companies or innovators who outsource their operation. And so it's imperative to have the right people in place, and obviously the right assets in place to be able to manufacture whatever drug product that they may need help to do. And so typically, it's all about the people. And in Massachusetts, attracting and retaining top talent in life sciences can be challenging, right? So for us, it's all about differentiating the company. That's about mission and vision and purpose. So what are we going after? How are we going to serve this market, the product innovators, and most importantly, the patients? How are we going to attract people in, and then make sure we have the appropriate comp and benefits plans that at least keep us competitive with the rest of the field, right? Because if I go out and I'm hiring a head of quality or a head of engineering, I'm competing with all of the great biotechs in our state, all of the great life sciences and med device companies in our state.
So Steve, let me just kind of piggyback on that question for a second. So maybe you could share with us some of the tools you use to make sure you're not competing against yourself on compensation, maybe some of the resources that you sort of keep handy, and maybe just a little bit of strategy in terms of how you thought about, you scale up to 90. I mean, do you do it division by division? Do you do it division head by division head and then hand over the reins to them? Maybe a little bit more color on that you feel comfortable sharing would be great.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the build, it's all about bringing in key leaders early, and building off of those foundational layers. Typically, rather than a division, we would see it on like a more of a site level. So we would, operating or manufacturing sites are kind of set entities in our business. And if you get big enough, they can roll into a division or something larger. But we typically look at them at the site. So we're looking for really that foundational layer, and that's gonna really drive future success and the ability to build that organization. Because as you grow, we sat in a room in 2019 and we outlined, okay, what's our vision, what's our mission, what do we want our values to be? But I can't convey that to every new employee in the company, right? We can do town halls and we can talk about them, but I really need our leaders to have that buy-in, and then they're going to recruit leaders who come in and also sort of live those values. So it's incredibly important to have that foundational layer of leadership. And then your question on, just comp and benefits. I mean, we look on the comp side, we have a lot of market data where we know, based on the level of how we're going to be competitive on a base salary. Every employee at Arranta and every employee at Brammer had equity in the company. So I'm a firm believer that I want all of my team to be in the long run on the strategy and driving the business. And that's like CEO to shop floor. And I think that everyone knows in this business, when we drive towards strategic goals, it's everyone has a piece of that long-term vision. And then I'd say on the benefit side, what I've been fortunate to be able to take advantage of is, via a PEO like TriNet is being able to plug into a benefits package that immediately is competitive within the market. And so for one of the larger dilemmas for a small company is if I go to Blue Cross or Tufts or any of the great health insurance plans with 15 people, I don't have a whole lot of leverage on cost or my ability to get really great plans. And so I found it very helpful to plug into a PEO like TriNet to be able to really leverage that on the benefit side. So that way, when I come in and I say, all right, here's the offer to be a director of engineering at Arranta Bio, I know I've got a competitive comp base and bonus. I know my equity is very competitive because not a lot of companies are going to offer that to all employees. And I know at the very least, I've got a baseline on benefits that I'm not going to lose someone because of benefits. And I think that's incredibly important given how competitive the labor market is in biotech and life science.
Yeah, that's a great segue. So my question is, we're talking about a lot about process, right? And I think from our conversations and conversations that I have with other people, once the snowball starts rolling down the hill, it becomes very hard to change the direction, right? So what are some of the key processes that you want to have in place prior to a large scale up?
Yeah, I think it's got to be a lot of the foundational components and fundamentals of being able to build and scale on top of. So I think of like your basics around IT systems and HR systems and really our operations process. So we're big on like, how do we, what's the process we follow to set set the day for goals, set the week for goals, set the month, and set the year. And so we that's how you drive in terms of an operations culture at a company to be able to make sure that you've got alignment from shop floor all the way up. So I think investing in some of those systems early, in my experience has benefited our company, and especially with Arranta to really invest in some of those things early. And build that foundational element so that we can expand a site, or we can add 10 customers or add 50 heads without having to add, say, like 2 HR heads to support that, right? So we've got some scale.
So when we're talking about the different size kind of gradients, right? How important is it to look long term when you're talking about those processes, right? Because IT, HR, recruiting, all of those pieces of the puzzle look very different at 20 people versus 300, right? So how important is that look ahead, mentality?
Yeah, it's pretty important to me, because if I'm making a decision, I'm not making it to support a company of 30 people, right? Like I need to make sure that, like, if I believe in our vision for the company and the strategy that we're employing, I know we're going to be bigger than that. And so any of those pieces, I'm definitely looking out long term and saying, is this viable in the long term? And I think that's one aspect. For instance, when I looked at like the TriNet options and saying like, yeah, we know this fits, right? 20 or 30 people, Jake, but could it fit 300, 400, 500 people? And that's all the analysis we're doing, not just on the HR side, but with, our IT systems, with our finance processes and systems, and making sure that we're putting in something that's scalable, and you're not suddenly hitting 200 people and saying, okay, now it's time for a change. That's not right. What, I've been entrusted with these responsibilities so that we can enable our business to grow, not so that, at 200, 300 people, you're suddenly switching and doing something different.
Right.
So Steve, when you're a CFO in a startup environment, you're wearing tons of hats and you're always sort of doing the constrained by, resources. I mean, how do you sort of solve the build versus buy strategy with business functions? How do you know what to outsource versus, or go contractor versus hire somebody to do that? What's some of the things that you've done in your past that maybe might be helpful for some of the folks here?
Yeah, it goes back for me to, regardless of the function, to a fundamental question of where do I want my team and my talent spending the bulk of their time, right? So if you think about the example of the HR side, do I hire top HR talent to come in and partner with my site heads, drive a strategic work plan, resource it, and help them plan, or do I bring in HR to administer payroll and sort of negotiate benefits? And there's nothing wrong with negotiating benefits or administering payroll. My point being, you have a finite amount of resources, and I need to bring in great business people who are also good at HR or IT or finance. And so I very much have the mindset of I want my entire team as business partners to enable our whole business to grow, rather than being focused on some of the transactional things I might be able to outsource. So this works very much the same way when I think about IT. So we have a head of IT. He's got a team underneath him that's focused on what are the systems and applications we need to put in place to make sure the next steps of growth are achieved. Most of the infrastructure is a managed service. Most of the security is a managed service. A big part of the desktop support is a managed service, because plugging into that really enables us to scale and not build out a huge sort of IT support or HR operations or transactional side.
Yeah. How different is that from some of the companies you served in the past? You said some of those more established companies that you worked with. I mean, how much has business changed in your career in terms of that sort of thinking?
Yeah, it's very different. So I grew up in bigger companies, right? So I was at Millipore. Merck, a company called Merck KGaA, acquired that business. I spent a few years with Merck KGaA, which is multinational, tens of billions of dollars in revenue, and then went to Bruker, which is also, tens of thousands of people, multinational company. And so typically you have much larger sort of G&A functions there, because they do both. They do the transactional side, and they'll do a lot of the business partner side. But what it taught me along the way, if I was ever going to be fortunate enough to be, a CFO or a leader, that is like there are some things that it is more efficient to peel off and plug into someone who's got the core competency to achieve it, like on the IT or the HR side. And if I didn't believe that fundamentally, I think I'd be a pretty bad CDMO business person, because that's the whole model that we buy in, which is you product company are an expert in developing a drug in the lab, conducting clinical trials, but you might not be an expert in operations, whereas we are, so come to us. And so that probably also contributes to why I'm more geared to say how do we split this to, what's more value add versus transactional based activity.
Right. Yeah, the walk, right?
Yeah.
So this is great. So let me ask you, Steve, we came into this year, I think in January 2020, if you had told me the outlook for this year, I would have told you the polar opposite of where we are now. We've seen fundamental shifts in need for office space, for work home, flexibility. But at the same time, a lot of our organizations, especially in medical device and biotech, are tied to a desk, right? And it's the lab space. You can't be doing these experiments at home. So how has COVID this year really impacted your scaling and your growth?
Yeah, regardless of the situation or the impact of COVID, we're always we always focus on safety first. And every single daily meeting we have, daily huddle, monthly leadership team meetings, and I open every board meeting with safety, because it's paramount to us and how we operate the business. So that mentality carried forward, obviously, with COVID, and dealing with as you noted, we can't make GMP. We can't have GMP manufacturing like in our home office or in our garages, right? That'd be pretty
Exactly.
bad.
Yeah.
Don't think agency would be all that pleased with that. So we have to balance, like, how do we keep our people safe, which is always paramount, always on the top of my mind, but still achieve what our clients need us to, which is to help them get these drugs into the clinic and commercialized. So we've done kind of a plethora of different things in terms of how do we socially distant, how do we importantly track all these things. You know, we have an app we use and sort of like these trackers that we have on our badges so that, you know, if unfortunately we do get a hit of, you know, on COVID, we can do the contact tracing and be very, very discreet about where people were and who they might have interacted with. You know, during this time, we've also been expanding our commercial operation in Massachusetts. So we're basically, when the pandemic really took off in March, we were, you know, in the midst of $100 million capital deployment in Massachusetts to build our new facility. And we've been able, with our partners at a company called DC Bean, been able to keep that project on schedule and on budget, but most importantly, safe for anyone that comes to that site and worked on. So we've put a tremendous amount of effort to this, and we've just had to rethink some of these processes and how we operate.
Was any of your scale up activity dramatically impacted in terms of just your productivity post-March versus pre-March? And if not, I mean, what do you think is the key to sort of keeping this growth going during this really unique and perilous time in some respects?
Yeah, you know, I don't think it's materially different in that, you know, we still need to have our really talented scientists and lab techs in the labs and our manufacturing associates in the clean rooms, you know, making these products. So the fundamental of our business never changes. I just think, you know, we need to be a little more cautious on, you know, how many people in a space at a time. And I think the most of it comes down to the tracking, right? And, you know, making sure that we have very, very discrete policies on coming into the office, on it, you know, if you're sick in any way, you need to log it in the app, and the app's going to tell you don't come in. And then, you know, if by some chance you are, you know, contagious, and we can track, you know, who you're in interaction with when you're in the facility, not outside of it, but within the facility, so we can effectively contact trace. So, you know, look, I mean, I do hope that it is temporary in nature, right? We have a lot of great companies vying for vaccines, and we hope that this is a temporary situation we're in. But I do think it fundamentally changes overall our concept of working from home. And, you know, we've all realized now we can be pretty effective in our home office, even if, you know, I've got a toddler flying around here and a dog and a 6-month-old, but, you know, you deal with it. And I think some of the silver lining of this will be we come out of this and say, you know what, if I have top talent that comes in and just says, I need to work 2 days from home, I think that's going to elicit a different reaction in a post-pandemic than it would have pre. And, you know, maybe pre-pandemic, you would have missed out on some talent pool because you would have said, no, you got to be in the office 5 days a week. But I think, you know, the silver lining might be we're a little bit more open to work from home or work remote.
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think something I continue to hear from HR leaders when we're talking about remote work is if you can't trust your employees to work efficiently, you know, less supervised than maybe they were previously, then you probably hired the wrong people, right? Mm-hmm. So on that note, how are you, and you kind of touched on it earlier, which was, you know, vision, mission, right, culture. How are you making sure you're bringing in the right people that fit, you know, in that model for your organization?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's as basic as making sure in your interview process you're testing either directly or indirectly the values, right? Because you know, any day of the week, you know, in a startup scenario, you might be more apt to take a really smart, hardworking individual that lives a lot of your values than someone who's maybe the technical expert in a particular topic. I think you've got to test that, and you've got to test the passion and really are they gonna live the mission and the vision and the values of the company early on? Because to my earlier point, if if you're not bringing in talent that is, then at some point that mission, vision, values is going to be diluted down the line, right? Because you're just sites are gonna eventually grow and sort of have their own culture, which they might anyway. But you know, you always want that connection back to the company mission and vision that you're trying to promote, because it's so key to the achieving strategic goals.
Yeah, definitely.
And on that culture question, Steve, when you guys started this company, did you have an outline of how you wanted the corporate culture to be? And then what have you done during the pandemic to make sure that that can actually exist in people's homes?
Yeah. Yeah, we outlined our values very early on, from, you know, our experience in past startups and, you know, Mark's experience and doing this before at Gallus. And then, you know, he ran operations at Genzyme for 25 years. So he's got a lot of experience building highly effective teams, which I've learned a lot from. And, you know, agility is so important. Like, it's one of our values, and it's so key to success. And it's something we really test as a value when we're interviewing and deciding to bring new team members on. What we've done during the pandemic is we've essentially over communicated. So typically we would have quarterly all hands meetings where we'd have all employees gathered. Normally they would have been in person, but we at the prime of the pandemic, we went to weekly all hands virtual meetings. And that was just to really over communicate on what's going on, how's this going to impact our business, you know, as we're still signing up new business, you know, there's no financial stress on the company. We're still growing, and then continuing to talk about, you know, how we're going to build this business. So we just went to a model where we said, you know what, people might get sick of seeing us every week, but the leadership team of this company is going to be front and center during this. And, you know, we've dialed it back a little bit as we've started to come out of it, and, you know, more people are going to site and whatnot, but we still are doing bi-weekly all hands town halls.
Yeah, it's got to be pretty hard to thread the needle between being a regular presence in your employees' lives and then making them feel like they're being sort of watched. How do you maybe they are, but how, you know, how do you sort of make sure that they feel more encouraged rather than
yeah I think, you know, people know
regulated
in terms of like having the all hands, that it's really about making sure everyone's comfortable with how we're approaching the pandemic and you know how it impacts our growth and our plans by and large, which it has not, luckily. And I think the stuff on site is really just about you know, the tracking on site, and you know, just to make sure that if someone is sick, we can do the contract tracing. So I think, given that it's all safety based, you know, we haven't gotten a ton of pushback on it.
Great.
Yeah, and you know, I think it's really interesting too, because I think, you know, from our conversation earlier this week, we had talked about kind of where you might be projecting forward another 12 months, right? From especially the employee headcount to also manufacturing capabilities and what kind of that would look like. Where do you think, you know, you obviously didn't stop hiring during the pandemic, right? Especially in those beginning months, there was no halting, right? So it was continuing. Yes, you were moving to maybe a different hiring model. Where do you think you excelled the most, and maybe what are maybe like one major challenge that you didn't see while you're going through, you know, kind of the remote hiring experience?
Yeah, I think in terms of a challenge during that is obviously not being able to be, you know, in a room or, you know, physically present with candidates during the process. I think there is still some value in having that, you know, in-person interview. But yeah, we've been able to add, you know, since last November to this point, you know, 70 plus employees, most of which have been hired virtually. Just starting to get into right now, you know, bringing people, you know, in for interviews, at least for higher level positions.
did you utilize, a longer interview process than you did previously? Was there more checks and balances going through that? Did you kind of change up the questions that you were asking, or, how did that look like?
Yeah, I mean, typically we would, we didn't really change the content of the interviews per se, right? Because I mean, we're testing for fit for the role, for fit for the company, and those remain the same. I think whether you're in person or remote, I think, we were able to do things a little bit differently in terms of bringing people in to do like group presentations where we'd have the entire interview panel on like a Zoom, whereas if you're doing that in person, it might be possibly a little intimidating to someone to have to.
Yeah, American Idol style, yeah.
But we're able to change it up. I think typically, regardless of pandemic or not, I mean, we typically move fast on hiring. So we don't have multiple layers of approval. Typically we bring in a top candidate, the team interviews, and they check the boxes on what we need them to in terms of fit, culturally, fit for the role. We're going to hire that person, right? We're going to be able to move fast, put an offer out, be competitive, and then bring that person in. And it goes back to that comment on agility and being able to scale the company. Because one of the competitive advantages we have in hiring is that we can move fast, we can be agile, which, if as the company grows, and layers grows, that could change.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you one more question, and then we're going to pivot over to Saul for a couple questions as well. So you've scaled so successfully at Brammer, you're scaling successfully again at Arranta. Is there anything that you, maybe looking back at it, that you would have done differently to either accelerate or maybe improve upon as a process?
Yeah, one thing I just generally say is, great business people should always be learning and adapting, like regardless of success or failure, right? So Brammer, by all measures, was a success. We grew a company. We grew the top line, like tenfold, and eventually sold a business that was 250 million top line revenue. Success. But if you're not learning from that and then taking best practices and what you learn there and roll it into the new company, I feel like you're doing a disservice. And I think when we look at how we built Arranta, we took some great things we did at Brammer, we rolled those forward. We brought in a brand new team. Most of our team isn't the Brammer team. It's brand new leaders we brought in, and they bring with them their experience too. So I think can't really pinpoint a specific to say I would do that differently and the whole thing would go. But I would say that you've got to be learning and adapting along the way, because if you're wed to one line or one process as a startup or as an entrepreneur, you can't do that, right? It's the day-to-day of being in one of these businesses, and why I'm so passionate about growing companies and helping other companies grow too, is that I love the day-to-day here. I love knowing that we could make a decision that might be just a hair different than what we thought the right decision was a few days back, that could impact our strategy and growth. So I think you learn along the way, you adapt, and then you wake up tomorrow and do it all over again. And that compounding of decisions you hope is going to result in a successful strategy and execution.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Welcome. Thank you.
That's great. And everybody, just feel free to throw some questions in the chat bot if you have some. Steve, is really good stuff here. Thanks for sharing a lot of these insights. Saul, besides being the only guy on the panel who doesn't cut his own hair, what I did notice that there was.
I'm getting close. Brian.
Tell us a little about your role at Vistra and how you fit into the puzzle here. So let's start with a broad question.
Sure. So within Vistra and historical experience here within Vistra, we've helped companies expanding internationally as a part of our DNA is what we do. We're part of a much broader firm now, let's say 2 years now. And so in addition to expanding from the US internationally, we also have clients who are expanding into the US as well. But it looks and feels similar. A lot of the things Steve was mentioning as he went through resonated completely, right? With it, there's a nuance to it clearly on an international scale, but you're still approaching a lot of the strategy, a lot of the HR elements, a lot of the structural elements very, very similarly. So that's the good news, right? Is it does start to look and feel pretty similar, let's say, but you are going to have individual nuanced knowledge to whatever country you're going to be going into. And that's kind of the hardest part, I think, for our clients. A lot of times is we always say you don't know what you don't know. And I think you're not even aware what questions to ask sometimes, right? But if you've done it before and you've stubbed your toe, you've had some challenges, hopefully, the next time you go through this, as Steve goes on to second, third type companies, you have seen some of these challenges and you can really learn from it.
Yeah, what are some of those key considerations you need to ask yourself first when you're trying to scale up and expand international? Just give us what are the 3 top line questions you have to answer?
I think we try oftentimes to start at the very base level. And by that, I mean structure, really taking a look at right sizing it and getting that correct as correct as you can, let's say, from the get-go. So taking a look, not just, and we heard this earlier, not just looking at what do I need for 30 employees or what do I need for the next 6 months, but what do I need for the next 12, the next 18 months. The last thing you want to do, because we all have limited time and investment dollars, last thing you want to do is have to do this twice, right? So making sure that you take the longer term view and getting the structure correct in place, whether that's a subsidiary or payroll, whatever it might be for your individual business. Starting on the right foot is going to be really, really key because it is expensive to make a switch, and unfortunately, sometimes as expensive or could take longer to make a switch midstream. So that's a very important point. Slight nuance to that, though, perhaps maybe if you're a new executive as well, and maybe you're coming into a structure that's already in place, whether that was organically set up or M&A, there is an opportunity as well to consider simplifying that structure. So entity rationalization, where you might have multiple entities in a country. Do you need them all? So you might have some ability to reduce your footprint, reduce your compliance. And I think that's an opportunity we're seeing, especially during this time, a lot of clients really starting to look at that a little more deeply. The other main point, which has a couple of subpoints to it for me, is it's all about risk mitigation. I think risk mitigation from an HR side of things, making sure that when you are expanding, that you're bringing on employees compliantly. So getting them on local contracts, ensuring you're doing all the right things from a required benefits standpoint, and then developing a package that's really attractive to them. We heard this as well from Steve, making sure that we can attract and retain those employees. There's a interesting point right now as you see more and more employees who are wanting to work remotely, and I think we've weathered the storm as best we all could. But it's very, very important to understand whether or not these candidates you're looking at do have the right to work in the country, or whether you have the footprint to support them in that country. Because it's one thing to want to bring someone on, but if you don't have the legal means to do so, it's a challenge. Last 2 points really is just one relates to structure about tax exposure, understanding what you're going to be doing in the country. Maybe it's directly invoicing clients, or maybe it's providing services, that kind of thing. Making sure, again, you tie that structure in to limit that risk from a tax standpoint. And then lastly, compliance. Compliance is always going to run through the vein of everything that we do for our clients. And whether, again, you focus on the key elements of the business, your core competencies, and outsource that focus, or you try to build the teams internally. Either way, making sure that you do have the right processes and the structure in place internally for tax, HR, governance, data, right? That's a large element now too as well, and making sure you have resources in place to help you maintain that compliance.
That's great. Yeah. The question. So I think we as people in Boston, Cambridge area think of ourselves as the center of the life science, biotech, medical device universe. I always have that running joke where the sphere around Kendall is literally like the center of the life science universe. My colleagues that work in San Francisco and LA, I always give them a hard time, constantly saying like, hey, we're the best, look at all our IPOs, right? All those fun things that we have going on here. But I think what's lost is that, there are all over the globe really fantastic centers of innovation popping up in so many different countries and different regions. So from your perspective, what are some of, the top priorities and top reasons why, maybe a US-based organization would start to look internationally?
Yeah, so this is oftentimes the very first conversation we'll have with a client or a prospect is about the why. Why are you wanting to expand internationally? It generally boils down to two main areas, I would say. Either and they both focus around growth, by the way. You may have someone that as an executive, you need to drive the business further. Or oftentimes what we used to hear was our CEO just got off a plane and he met this guy that is the guy or the lady who we need in market to help drive the business. We got to get him on board, and I've already made an offer, so what do you do now? So that's pretty common in our space, but it's about talent, right? It's all about the talent and what you need to fit the pieces of the puzzle together to grow the business. So I think that's always a real key indicator of why our clients are seeking to expand internationally outside of the U.S. and maybe let's say they've in already a mature market for them here, they want to expand. So I think it starts there, and then really it's all about at that point. Steve mentioned about the package and developing an offer that's compelling enough to bring them on board, keep them on board, make them happy. Above and beyond that, I think it comes down to strictly commercials. So do you have a reason to be in this country? Maybe it's a really key country for taking your business further. There's a lot of clients in that area. Or maybe you have a client that you've just signed that forces you in that direction too. Either way, both of those are going to result in you probably having something to be established in the foreign country. But I always encourage to make sure that there is a strong commercial reason or business case for being there. Don't just follow one resource, because what do you do if it doesn't work out, right? The reality is sometimes they don't, right? Relationships fail. And so making sure you have a really solid reason for being there from a commercial standpoint is going to still ensure ultimate success, whether it's the resource didn't work out, maybe you had regulatory delays, whatever it might be, at least then you still have that structure and framework in place for when you need to proceed further versus losing a candidate and now having to unwind all of these other operations that are there.
So what are some of the other major pitfalls a company needs to make that they can encounter that they should probably start thinking about avoiding when they're expanding internationally?
Yeah. I think a lot of times we are all so driven in wanting to grow the business that we perhaps could move too quickly and might just kind of slow down a little bit and really, again, take a look at the longer term view and strategy. Again, beyond 6 months to 18 months or more, seeing where you're really taking the business. I think it's kind of a common sense, easy approach, but you'd be surprised. And I think engaging all of the relevant business partners into the discussion. So this isn't just a finance exercise, right? After all, we have to bring in our tax experts, our operations teams, HR, legal, whatever, so to make sure that you have full buy-in and you have all the team aligned to help you expand. And lastly, it kind of, again, it's probably a bit of a flippant comment, but the main pitfall is just getting it wrong. Really, this could be in terms of the structure itself, location, following the wrong talent, or bringing people on in a non-compliant standpoint. All of this is going to force you to have to undo something, have to go backwards a little bit. I always kind of take with the carpenter motto approach, which is measure twice and cut once, right? Making sure you are digging deeply into what your plans are and where you want to be when you grow up. going to be blunt, you're probably not going to get it 100% right. That's just a reality. The business is changing too quickly. There's too much complexity. But at least if you engage all the right colleagues and you use a bit of caution there, I think you at least have a fighting shot of getting it pretty close to being right.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
So you know, a lot of the things we've talked about is very much the beginning of, okay, I think I want to expand internationally. What should I look out for? What are my baseline reasons? Do some of those things change when you're talking about maybe a merger or acquisition versus you know, kind of like a virgin moving into a new company, right? A new country, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure there's got to be some nuances that differ.
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, I think you're going to run into some of the same challenges. You may or may not, you know, need to set up some additional structures or some additional support for your employees in your commercial side of your business. But at the same time, a lot of the challenges do have a nuance, and one of those I would argue is really the due diligence side. Really, truly understanding what you're buying. Are you buying a company that is in a compliant status? Are you going to have a bunch of cleanup to do, whether that's from an employment side or a tax side of things? Is there a natural fit on culture? You know, Steve mentioned some culture elements earlier. I think the cultural piece is really, really important as well, because a lot of M&A deals don't work out strictly because of culture. So making sure you have a plan for how you're going to bring the cultures together. Perhaps just through an expat coming over. There's a lot of times we'll see our clients use that, or equally, you know, how will you actually work to keep the local leadership perhaps in place and stabilize, and then just getting business partners or key employee buy-in, I would say, on the M&A is important. That way, you know, you have people on both sides of the fence who want this to work, really truly work together.
Thank you.
So let's toss this up to both of you. Just give us a couple pieces of advice that you'd like our guests to take away from the call today. What do you think, if they remember one thing that you talked about from your perspective, what do you want to make sure that each of them takes away? Steve, we can start with you.
Sure. I think for me, it's, you know, it's all about the people and the team you build, right? So it's never too early to spend that a day or week or whatever long it takes to really define, like, what are we doing here, right? What's the mission? What's the vision of this business? And what are the values that we want to, you know, live day to day within this company? So I'd say, you know, really adhere, like getting that in place and recruiting that in your future leaders. And then, you know, don't be afraid to change the plan either. I mean, set a business plan, set a strategic vision, but, you know, it's not a straight line, right? There are a lot of paths to success, and having the agility to make decisions on the fly and may have to backtrack to go forward or change a principle that you might have had in your business plan, but it may mean success in the future. Thanks.
I think lastly from my side, just two points, really understanding, I would say, the total costs of operating in a country. So it's more than just the compliance pieces and setting up the framework. It's the tax, it's the employees, and, you know, not just salary, but benefits as well, right? So collectively looking at the total cost of entering into a country and whether or not you have the commercials to back that up. And lastly, just try to do as best you can to be educated about the area you're going, knowing before you go. Again, understanding the employment, the tax, legislative landscape in the country, I think is really, really important. At least then it gives you a chance to make some decisions, perhaps to be in one location versus another. And you might be able to simplify your life and simplify some of your compliance requirements just a little bit if possible.
Yeah. So this actually question came to me directly here. It's for Steve. You guys, were you venture capital backed on the new venture, and what were some of the tools and strategies you used to develop your communication with and potential investors?
Yeah, good question. So in both this business and the last one, we had a sole institutional investor, Ampersand Capital, which is more is a private equity versus a pure play venture capital. But it's really having a partner, and I think why I deeply enjoy working with the investment team there is, they're really a partner to the business and driving strategy and driving outcomes of the business. There's no real secret sauce to communication. I just say it's, openness and, calling something when it is either bad news or missing a result. I mean, just having control over an understanding of what happened and being open versus, maybe trying to sugarcoat anything. I think a lot of investors and a lot of CFOs are laser focused on the economics, right? So the numbers are the numbers, and they're really looking for leaders who can drive result, but also have that open communication back. And I think just personally that has led to a lot of success, just having sort of that transparency with our investors.
So you said Ampersand funded both ventures, is that right?
Yep. They were the sole institutional at Brammer Bio, and they are at Arranta Bio.
So they liked you guys. I would guess they were happy with you. Happy to reinvest.
But they're terrific group of men and women at Ampersand that are focused on life science and really on the services side. So it's why it's natural for them to be attracted to a CDMO in both instances, but they look at a lot of different sort of tangential services to the industry that are EBITDA positive or about to be EBITDA positive versus typical VC setup where you're going to be likely burning cash for a little while until you get some approvals and get some either licensing or whatnot or an approved product.
Yeah, and just a quick question on the market you're in, the microbiome therapy market. You said it's the next gene therapy market. I mean, I would assume that on the contract manufacturing side, what's that industry look like? Is that a new derivative of the contract manufacturing world, or does the fact that how robust is this opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, when I look at it, I see it as a therapeutic modality that's on the precipice of a big takeoff, and I think that's akin to what cell and gene therapy was a ways back. And what you have is a ton of great product innovators right now that are working on products from preclinical in the lab all the way to promoting some of these things into mid to late stage trials. You don't have any commercially approved products right now. So you've got this, sort of wave of demand coming. And then on the flip side, by focusing on microbiome, we're really able to build a capacity that's unlike any other that existing right now, and that will be focused on microbiome and be a key player in the CDMO space. So it's a combination of the demand that we see coming, and then overall we think we're primed to be the best partner in the space on the supply side. And it's a complex biologic. We've built our facilities to very high standards that can be able to do a variety of complex biologics, not just fermentation-based microbiome medicine, but a lot of different things. And, it's really just building to that high standard, maintaining very rigid, quality control and quality within the plant to be able to make sure that what you're ultimately bringing out is safe to go into humans.
Right. Wow, it's fascinating. I look forward to really tracking this next wave here. It's really exciting times.
It's exciting, because it's discovering a new piece of really a new frontier in biotech and in medicine. 20 plus years ago, we finally cracked the human genome. It took billions of dollars to do, many years to do, and that's unlocked all these different therapies from the gene therapy side, where you're being able to cure different diseases, on the cell therapy side, where you're going in and curing some pretty bad cancers, And then now looking forward in the microbiome, where scientists are really looking at the gut-brain axis, and a healthy microbiome doesn't just mean a healthy gut. It could mean overall homeostasis in the body, and different applications with regard to Parkinson's and different cancers. So it's a very exciting therapeutic modality, and one where we're pretty bullish on its ultimate success.
Absolutely. Wow. Well, we look forward to following the story. And Steve, Saul, Jake, it's a great conversation we had today.
Thank you.
I want to thank you for joining us. Jake, do you have any closing thoughts that you wanted to share?
No, thank you everybody for your time today. And, if you have questions, obviously, feel free to reach out, and, we'll be able to help anybody as much as we can.
Great. Well, on behalf of MassMEDIC and our partners at TriNet and our great guests today, I want to thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.